Welcome to the Living the Dream podcast with Curveball. If you believe, you can achieve. Welcome to the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast, a show where I interview guests that teach, motivate, and inspire. And today, I definitely have a motivational individual with me today. His name is Bryan Gillette. He is an author, founder of his own leadership business, former human resource executive in Silicon Valley, and he is an ultra endurance athlete, and his specialization is helping people elevate their potential and push their limits beyond their perceived capabilities. So we're going to be talking to him about the amazing things that he's done in his life and how he helps people elevate their potential. So Bryan, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's nice to be on your show, Curtis. Great to talk to you and look forward to the conversation.
Why don't you start off by telling everybody a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, well, you did a nice job with the intro, but a little bit more. So I live in the San Francisco Bay Area and grew up in this area. As you had mentioned, I'm a former senior HR executive, so vice president of human resources for a mid-sized technology company, and been in several technology companies in the human resources and leadership development space in my career. And then about 10 years ago, in fact, 10 years ago, this past month, I started up my own business, Summiting Group, and focusing on strategic planning, aligning teams, and then executive coaching and leadership development. So as you mentioned, I'm also an ultra distance athlete, so I love adventures. And so I've done a lot on the ultra distance side on bikes, including biking 300 miles in one day, or biking across the United States, 4,000 miles. And then got involved in running a number of years ago and did the marathon, did some 50s, 100, and then did a 200-mile run around Lake Tahoe. Which was over the course of 76 hours. So I also love to travel. I've been around the world with my wife twice, and then one of those times we took our kids for a year. We took them out of school. So that's a little bit about me.
Well, tell us how you got into the ultra distance athlete thing. That's amazing to be riding. What was that like, and how do you prepare for riding across the U.S. and running around Lake Tahoe and stuff like that?
Yeah, preparing for something like that, or preparing for anything at work. I just put a book out, writing a book. They are all big things, and they all kind of are similar in terms of how you prepare for them. So how I got involved in ultra distance. So I've been a cyclist all my life, since I was a little kid. And I remember as a teenager, my parents and I rode our bikes 200 miles from kind of my home up into Yosemite National Park. And, we did it over the course of 4 days. And I just really enjoyed kind of getting from one place to another under your own power, where normally we would have taken a car. And so I got involved. I did several trips down from Canada, from Oregon, from Washington, so 500-mile, up to 1,000-mile trips. And I just enjoyed it. And then, I knew a friend of mine had ridden across the United States, and I thought, wouldn't that be cool to go from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean, all under your own power? And so I did that when I was 20. And it was just a blast. And so I just fell in love with the long distance stuff, and then started doing kind of long distance day rides, 100, 200 miles, and then eventually a 300 mile on the bike. And as I was finishing that 300-mile bike ride, I realized, I haven't done running before. I'd like to run a marathon, because that's kind of the ultimate. And that's how I got involved in running. And you finish one event and you think, okay, now what's next? And preparing for, we could talk a long time about how do you prepare for something like this, but you got to be able to see the finish line. So I've got the name of my book is Epic Performance: Lessons from 100 Executives and Endurance Athletes on Reaching Your Peak. And the epic performance, what that stands for is the E. And this is how you kind of get from idea to finish line. The E is, how do you envision the big things in life that you want to accomplish? You got to be able to see that finish line. The P is, how do you put a plan in place in order to accomplish your vision? The I is, how do you iterate to that plan? You don't start off running 200 miles. You start off running 4 miles, and then you go to 5 miles, and then 6 miles. And so that's the I is iterate. The C is collaborate. How do you collaborate with people who've done this before? Somebody has done something similar before, and how do you learn from their successes? How do you learn from their failures? And then lastly, the performance. You just got to go out and do it. So the epic gets you to the start line, and then the performance gets you from the start line to the finish line. And as I interviewed these 100 executives and endurance athletes, what it took for some of them to start their own company, to rise to the level of a CEO, a CIO, a CHRO. They're all kind of some of the basic things I talked about in terms of envision, plan, iterate, collaborate, and perform. And it's a lot of hard work.
So what kind of bike did you use? Are you using a motorcycle, or what kind of bike are you
Oh no,
using?
this is a pedal bike. So
Wow,
it's one of them was I think I had a 21 speed, one's an 18 speed. I think on some of the early rides I was on a 10 speed, but no, this is all under no motorbike, no motors whatsoever on either the runs or the rides.
amazing. So tell us about what inspired you, and what made you write your book.
There, I remember writing down a list of things that I wanted to do when I was in college, just kind of that life list. And one of them was to write a book. But I knew I had to have some body of work. I had to have something to say. And it wasn't till a number of years ago that it really kind of came to me. I mean, I had been working on the concept of epic performance, and how do you dream and see big things. And a while back, when I was doing the 300-mile bike ride, I thought that would push me to my limits. I thought it would either push me physically or mentally to my limits, and I wanted to see how far I could take the mind and the body. And I thought that 300-mile bike ride would do it. It'd be the first time I was riding through the night. So I was on the bike for just under 25 hours. I had some breaks along the way, but in a sense, I left at 5 in the morning and I arrived about 5:30 the next morning. And it was hard. There's no doubt about it. And one of the things that, as I was trying to push myself to the limits, I realized at about mile 275, so I only have 25 miles left. It's about 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning. And I thought, I didn't come close to in my limit. It was hard. And earlier in the day, I had seen somebody die, likely had a heart attack on the bike. And I came across him. He was on the side of the road, and he obviously hit his limit, but it's like I didn't hit mine. And I collided with another bike earlier in the day. I needed a new wheel, but still kind of with that, I did not hit the limit that I thought I might hit. And that got me thinking, it's like maybe we put these limits in our head and they actually hold us back from getting where our true potential is. And then, about five years ago, so my wife and I took our 2 boys when they were 9 and 11 out of school for a year, and we traveled around the world. And before we went, some friends held a going away party, and there were a bunch of people there. And I remember a number of people came up to us and said, I could never do what you're doing. And that hit me because they could. And they were telling themselves they couldn't, now some of them wouldn't want to, and I get that, but they could do it. And so with those two things of kind of me thinking I had this limit, and then this other instance where people said, oh, I could never do that, I thought, I want to be able to see how can I, play a part in somebody trying to reach a little bit further there than their limit. And that's how the book came to be. And it's a pretty practical playbook on how do you start to dream bigger, not just dreaming a year out or 2 years out, but how are you dreaming 20, 30 years out, so that when you get to a much older age, you don't look back and go, God, I wish I would have traveled around the world, or I wish I would have moved to that company, or started up a company. So you don't live with those regrets. And that's kind of how the book came to be.
Well, what surprised you about the executive that you interviewed for your book?
A couple things, Curtis, surprised me. First of all, when I set out the goal that I was going to interview 100 people, I thought, wonder how many people I am going to have to ask in order to get to 100 interviews. And I wasn't quite sure. I only had two people that said no, which that surprised me in and itself. But only two people said no. And what it made me kind of reinforce, and I'd heard this many times, and part of me kind of believed it, but part of me didn't, is I don't like to hear the word no. And so I was afraid that if I'd go out and ask these people, they'd say no, and that would kind of put a damper on my plans. But if you don't ask, the answer is going to be no. So if you at least ask, your chances of getting a yes answer go way up. And so that just kind of reinforced it, and it surprised me. And the other thing, I mean, there were a number of things that surprised, but one other thing that surprised me, I'm interviewing, of the 100 people that I interviewed, about 75% were executives. So kind of founders of companies, presidents of companies, or at the C level, chief executive, chief information officer, chief technology. So at the in the executive ranks, or they founded their president of their company or something along those lines. About 75% were in that category, and then about 25% were in the endurance athlete category. And I played in both sides, and it's the reason why I wanted to interview kind of both of those is because I think there's some similarity between sport, what people do in the endurance side and what people do in the business side, and so I wanted to be able to understand that. And so I figured, I mean, some of these people started up their own company and, ended up selling it for a lot of money. And some started up a company and it didn't go anywhere. They lost money. And so I figured a lot of these people probably are very comfortable with risk and have no problems taking big risks. And so when I'd ask them, I said, what's your thought on risk? They would all say, we're very calculated, or I'm very calculated in the risks that I take. I do my homework. I understand what the risks are and understand kind of where I am comfortable. So where I thought they were going to just be, oh yeah, I can take all sorts of risk, they take a very pragmatic view on risk, and they analyze what the pros, what the upside, and what the downside could be. And then they pull the trigger and they move forward.
Well, speaking of risk, what advice would you give leaders to encourage them to take more risks in organizations?
Yeah, I think too often we like to play in that comfortable zone. I often refer to it as, if you're swimming, being in the comfortable zone is when you're in the shallow end of the pool. And we like to be in the shallow end of the pool because it's comfortable. And every once in a while you have to move into the deep end and you have to get uncomfortable. And I think you should be looking at yourself of how are you spending a certain period of your time. It's not all the time, but how are you spending a certain period of your time in that uncomfortable zone? Because that's when you really, you push yourself. That's when you start to grow and you learn a lot. And so as an executive, it's how are you making it safe for your team to kind of try to move into that uncomfortable zone when failure occurs, and failure should be occurring. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, my parents would take my brother and I skiing somewhere for a week, into like Colorado or Utah or Idaho. And I remember we were in Breckenridge, Colorado. I think I was probably about 10 at the time. And at the end of the first day, I come skiing down the hill, and I come to this nice sliding stop and spray snow all over my dad. And I'm feeling like the greatest skier in the world. And I said, God, Dad, I haven't fallen all day, and I'm so proud. And he compliments me on my form, and he says, one thing to keep in mind is if you don't fall, you're not pushing yourself. And so it's okay to fall every time. And that, that resonated with me. It probably didn't resonate as much as it should have, but it did resonate. So, we got to be as executives or leaders, we have to be able to, allow people to fall every once in a while. We have to get people to be able to think bigger and envision those big ideas about where they want to go in life. And so how do you build that environment that makes it okay to think bigger? I remember, every time I would manage a team, I would have them, spend a certain, like 5% of their time working on things that had nothing to do with their MBOs, their goals, their quarterly goals. Because I wanted them to start looking out further and research new technology. I mean, what are this? So most of the goals are based on what we have to do this quarter or this year. And I wanted them to be thinking about what are the things we have to do in the next couple of years, in 5 years or 10 years, and start thinking about that. So when it gets closer, we're already a step ahead of the competition. We're kind of getting ready, more prepared for it. So, as leaders, it's like, how do you help people think bigger? How do you kind of help encourage them to get into the deep end of the pool? And when failure does occur, we can either reward it. You don't want failure, but we got to have some failure that shows that we're pushing the limits. And if you're not pushing those limits, somebody else will, and they're going to take over kind of your business.
Well, you have a saying that says it's good to be nervous. So tell everybody what you mean by that.
Yeah, I do think it's good to be nervous. It kind of goes along with the get comfortable being uncomfortable. Think about what your nervous quotient could be, and if you're nervous about doing something, you're thinking big. If you're not nervous about taking on some endeavor, then you're probably not thinking big enough. And I was working with an organization just in the last couple of weeks, and they put up some of their goals. I was helping them put together their 1 and 2 year game plan, and they put the goals up. We had them up on a piece of flip chart paper, and I looked back at them and I asked them. I said, do these goals, do they make you nervous at all? Are you nervous when you look at them? And they all kind of looked at me and nodded, no, not really. And my response was, maybe we need to think a little bit bigger. Now, you don't necessarily want every goal to make you nervous, but some of them should make you nervous, and it shows that you're pushing yourself a little bit harder. And chances are, there's this difference between being nervous and it's like, there's no way I can do it. Nervousness should be, it's like, okay, this is going to be hard. I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to do it. So you should have some, a little bit of doubt. If you can easily hit it out of the park, then, talking about curveball, if you can easily hit it out of the park, well, maybe you're ready for a bigger park.
Well, let's this next question is a two-part question. You took off from a high-paying job to travel around the world. The first question is, was that hard to do? And the second question, you took your kids out of school to do it. Did you face any repercussions? But because I know that the requirements on having them in school, how did you get around that?
So, was it hard? It was easy to decide to go. That there's no doubt about it. It's hard. It's hard to be on the road. We were moving on average every 3 days. I think we were in 29 countries or something along that. Our kids, just like whether they were home or were in some exotic land, kids are kids, boys are boys. They're still going to fight. They're still going to disagree. So that's the same whether you're traveling or you're not traveling. But it was really easy to decide to go. My wife and I, we had decided pretty much before they were born that we would do something. Once we had kids and they got to a certain age, this toward the end of elementary school is a good time to go. We thought, let's take them out of school. And we had like 9 years to prepare for it. 9 years to save up, 9 years to kind of start laying things out and on how we were going to do it. But there's no doubt about it. It was hard. I think all great things at some point are hard. The second part. Oh, the second part of the question was about schooling and what were the ramifications. They actually came back, I believe, ahead of their peers. It's surprisingly easy, at least in the United States, to take kids out of school for a year. And you think about when you look at when you'd have to figure out what grade your kids go into school, there isn't, in many cases, there isn't an entrance test to figure out, oh yeah, they're ready for fourth grade, they're ready for fifth grade. What they look at is they look at your age. And that's when that's how they figure out what grade you are. I mean, there's kids coming in from all sorts of all different countries. And most of them aren't taking entrance exams. They look at it, it's like, okay, that kid is 9. They're going to go into the third grade. And what we had talked to a number of people beforehand. This is the C part of EPIC, collaborate, and understood kind of what needed to be done. Basically, we got the math curriculum, and we had the kids do a math program or a math assignment every day that there would have been school back at home, and it would take anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes. And so they would do a math lesson, and I had the answer key, or my wife had the answer key, and we could look at it, and if they needed help, we could help them. And the times that I couldn't help them, we would call into one of the teachers who we'd built a good relationship with. And so they would do that. And then they read a bunch. I mean, fortunately my kids are good readers. And so they were reading constantly. And so between the reading and the math, that kind of takes care of most of it. And keep in mind, they're learning geography. They know geography better than most of their peers. They probably know geography better than most of their teachers. And so you learn this stuff along the way. So when we came back, they just went into the next grade and had no problems whatsoever, and were testing higher than their peers were compared to the previous year. So if you talk about ramifications, it's like from a ramifications, they came back, stronger. I'm not sure what that says about the school system, but people are often worried about that. And I will say that is one thing to not be worried about. There's a lot of things to be worried about on a trip like that. That's not one of them.
Okay. Well, tell us about any current or upcoming projects that you're working on that people need to know about, and kind of tell us about that book again.
Yeah, I mean, so the big one is the book. It comes out August 16th. It's on Amazon for pre-order. If it's this is before August 16th, but after August 16th, it will be in hardback or in the Kindle version. And so that's the biggest thing that I'm working on now. There's I'm doing some executive coaching projects that I just absolutely love to do, and then building up epic performance.
All right. Well, let us know about any contact information that you have, any websites, or how can people connect with you and stay in touch with you?
Yeah, so thank you, Curtis. So the best way to connect up with me is if you go to my website, which is epicperformances.com. So that's EPIC performances with an S at the end.com. And you can connect up with me or connect up through Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter or Instagram. LinkedIn is what I tend to use the most, just from the business perspective. And if you go into Epic Performances, there is an assessment that I've created that allows you to look at how well do you perform on the 5 behaviors: the envision, plan, iterate, collaborate, perform, where your strengths and where are some of the areas you could potentially work on. So there's an assessment, and it's going to ask you for a code when you do it. And if you just type in curveball, that code will work. And one of the things, you don't have to be great at all 5 of those areas of envision, plan, iterate, collaborate, and perform. You probably want to be really good at 2 or 3. But when I met with the 100 executives, and endurance athletes, they weren't great at all. There were some people that were really good at envision, and some people that weren't so good at envision or plan or iterate, and vice versa. So it's being able to understand, okay, that assessment will help you understand where do I really good at, and maybe I want to get a little bit better, but where are some of the areas that I'm weak at, and I may need to compensate somehow.
Close us out with some final thoughts, maybe something that we haven't talked about that you would like to touch on, or just any final thoughts that you have for the listeners.
Yeah, thanks, Curtis. I think the key one is, we're on this planet for a certain amount of time. And, if you look at just the statistics, it's anywhere from 70 to 80 years. My wife's biological father lasted about 31 years, so he died really young, but her 2 grandparents lived to be, or 2 grandfathers lived to be in the 94, I believe it was, and both her grandmothers lived to be almost 102. So we don't know how long we're on here, but if you just kind of look at the average of 70, 80 years, it's how do you use that time on Earth? And I just don't want to get to be toward the end of that time and look back and realize, man, I wish I would have. There's a book that was written by Bronnie Rare out of the UK, and she works with a lot of people. She kind of as they're dying in their final months. And she had interviewed them and would talk to them. And one of the things she found is those people, when they had regrets, they were regrets about things that they didn't do versus regrets about some of the things that they did do. And so, whenever I'm faced with kind of some big decision, whether it's changing jobs, whether it's starting my own company, whether it's writing a book, whether it's traveling around the world, the one question I often ask is, in 10 or 20 or 30 years, will I regret not doing this? And if the answer is yes, then I have to seriously look at doing whatever that is. If the answer is no, then all right, maybe I don't need to. But really, it's like, look at those things and imagine you're 80 years old. What are the things that you're going to look back and go, God, I wish I would have. I wish I would have started a podcast. I wish I would have traveled the world. And if you'll regret not doing it, kind of really, really consider, how you can how you can start moving in that direction.
Great message to end this episode on, ladies and gentlemen. epicperformances.com. Be sure to pick up Bryan's new book when it comes out and check out everything that he's up to. Go take that episode. Follow, rate, review, share this episode to as many people as possible so we can start having more people all around the world having epic performances. Bryan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Curtis. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
For more information on the Living the Dream podcast, visit www.djcurveball.com. Until next time, stay focused on living the dream.